Welcome back to the channel. In every great city, there are stories that vanish beneath the noise, lives that slip quietly through the cracks of history. Tonight, we travel back to New York City, the year 2001, to meet a woman whose disappearance still defies explanation. Her name was Dr. Sneha Anne Philip, a young physician, a wife, and an immigrant who had built a life in the heart of Lower Manhattan. Sneha was born in Kerala, India, and raised in a family that believed deeply in education and service. Like many who left their home country in pursuit of opportunity, she carried two worlds inside her, the traditions of the East and the ambitions of the West. Her family moved to the United States when she was young, settling first in upstate New York. From early on, she stood out bright, outspoken, and full of empathy for anyone who suffered. Medicine seemed a natural calling. She studied at Johns Hopkins University, one of the most demanding schools in America, and later attended medical school in Chicago. Her classmates remembered her as sharp, passionate, and sometimes headstrong, someone who could debate professors and comfort a stranger in the same breath. After graduating, Sneha returned to New York for her residency. There, she met Dr. Ron Lieberman, another young physician whose calm nature balanced her restless energy. The two married in 2000 and moved into a small apartment in Battery Park City, just a few blocks from the World Trade Center. Their life together looked, from the outside, like a modern American dream. Two doctors in love, living in the city that never sleeps, their future full of promise. Friends described them as inseparable, often seen walking their neighborhood, sharing late dinners, and laughing about hospital stories only medical workers would understand. Sneha had a strong, independent streak. She believed women could live fully, without apology. She loved fashion, nightlife, and the quiet satisfaction of helping patients through dark nights. Yet behind that calm surface, there were subtle fractures, small personal struggles that even those close to her could not fully see. She had been under professional pressure, and some colleagues said she was sometimes outspoken in ways that clashed with hospital expectations. Others remember her warmth, her generosity, and her refusal to stay silent in the face of injustice. Still, nothing in her life suggested what would happen next. In early September 2001, she seemed ready to start fresh, looking forward to her career and the simple rituals of city life, shopping for her home, cooking with her husband, planning for the week ahead. No one, least of all Sneha, could know that she was living her final day in a world that was about to change forever. The next 24 hours would not only erase the skyline she called home, they would erase her too, leaving behind one of the most haunting mysteries linked to September 11th. Sneha's path toward medicine was not just a career choice. It was the rhythm of her life. From her college days at Johns Hopkins University, she had shown the kind of curiosity that refused to settle for half answers. Friends remembered her spending late nights in the library, poring over anatomy textbooks and case studies long after everyone else had left. She was not studying for grades. She was studying because she cared about what made people hurt and how they healed. After college, Sneha moved to Chicago for medical school. The change of city did not soften her determination. It sharpened it. She thrived in the intensity of the hospital environment, the long hours, the constant pressure, the high stakes. She volunteered for extra shifts, spent holidays in wards when others went home, and was known for comforting patients others found difficult. To her, being a doctor was not just about science. It was about presence, about sitting next to someone in pain and refusing to look away. Her professors described her as a strong personality, a phrase that can sound like praise or warning, depending on who says it. She could argue fearlessly when she believed a patient was being mistreated or a decision was rushed. That same conviction would later color how people remembered her: independent, outspoken, and unwilling to fit quietly into any mold. When she finished her studies, New York City was waiting bright, overwhelming, alive. She was accepted into a medical residency at Cabrini Medical Center, right in the heart of Manhattan. It was a demanding post, but Sneha thrived on the chaos of city hospitals. She lived surrounded by the rhythm of sirens and footsteps, the pulse of a place that never truly sleeps. It was there, during her early years of training, that she met Dr. Ron Lieberman, another physician just starting out. Their connection was quick but steady. Two people who understood the long hours, the emotional exhaustion, the quiet pride that came from saving a life at 3A. And Ron, Sneha found a calm to balance her fire. Together, they dreamed of building a future that blended their ambition with their shared desire to help others. By the time she entered her second year of residency, Sneha had built an identity that many admired: a dedicated doctor, a loyal wife, and a woman who moved through the world with confidence and warmth. Those who knew her described her as the kind of person who lit up every room she entered, someone who seemed destined for a long, meaningful life in medicine. But destiny has its own logic. And as the summer of 2001 turned into September, the career she had worked so hard for would soon collide with an event so catastrophic that even her skills as a doctor could not protect her from what was coming. By the year 2000, Sneha's life seemed to be settling into something close to happiness. After years of studying and moving from city to city, she had found a home, not just a place, but a person. Her marriage to Dr. Ron Lieberman was not the fairy tale kind built on perfection. It was a partnership grounded in understanding. They were both young doctors, both exhausted from long shifts, both learning to balance compassion for others with the small, ordinary moments that make up a marriage. They moved into a high-rise apartment in Battery Park City, a calm pocket of lower Manhattan surrounded by water and skyline. The windows looked out toward the World Trade Center, the Twin Towers standing like guardians over the neighborhood. For two people who had spent years in hospitals, always surrounded by urgency, the view offered something simple: stillness. Neighbors remembered them as friendly, but private. They spent evenings cooking, walking by the Hudson, or hosting quiet dinners with friends. On days off, Sneha loved exploring the city. She would wander through shops in Soho, visit art exhibits, or stop for coffee near the harbor. She was not afraid to live vividly. New York gave her that freedom, the sense that every street had a story, and every face could teach her something. Ron described her as independent, maybe too independent for some people's comfort. She was social, curious, and sometimes impulsive. But he also admired that about her. She had a confidence that drew people in, a brightness that made ordinary things feel alive. Their apartment was filled with small signs of new beginnings: wedding photos, medical textbooks, recipes torn from magazines, and plans pinned to the refrigerator, vacations, furniture ideas, schedules that always changed. They were building a future, one late night at a time. In those days, Sneha seemed to be finding balance between the two sides of herself: the disciplined doctor and the woman who loved art, fashion, and nightlife. Her family sometimes worried about her pace, the way she burned through days and nights without pause. But Sneha was chasing a life that felt full, not just safe. No one could have imagined how temporary that calm would be. Just beyond their window stood the towers that defined New York's skyline, and within a year of moving in, those same towers would become the center of a tragedy that would swallow not only the city, but Sneha's entire story. In the quiet of that apartment, surrounded by all the small details of a new life, she was just 31 years old, a doctor, a wife, and a woman who seemed to have everything ahead of her. None of it hinted that her name would soon be written among the thousands who never came home. The last day anyone saw Sneha alive began like so many others, unremarkable, ordinary, almost peaceful. On September 10, 2001, she was off duty from her hospital shift. That afternoon, she spent hours chatting online with her mother, a comforting routine they kept despite their busy lives. They spoke about simple things, plans for the coming week, her career, her marriage, and nothing in her tone suggested anything unusual. By late afternoon, Sneha decided to go out. She told her mother she might head downtown to shop and maybe stop by Windows on the World, the restaurant atop the North Tower of the World Trade Center, to meet a friend or have a drink. That casual comment, spoken with no drama or meaning, would later feel heavy with eerie weight. Around 5:18 a.m., a security camera at Century 21, a department store just across from the Twin Towers, caught her image. She was wearing a brown dress and sandals, calmly browsing through aisles. The footage showed her buying lingerie, shoes, and bed linens, small domestic things, signs of a woman planning for tomorrow. She used her American Express card, then stepped out into the fading light of downtown Manhattan. That was the last confirmed record of her existence. When her husband, Ron, returned home after midnight, the apartment was empty. He assumed she would decide to stay with her cousin or a friend, something she had done before after late nights out. The next morning, he woke to a world on fire. From their window, the view of the towers turned into smoke and ash. He searched hospitals, shelters, and morgues, clinging to the hope that she was somewhere among the injured or lost. But Sneha never came home. Those few hours from her mother's phone call to the department store footage remained the only tangible timeline investigators ever had. Every detail, every receipt, every step she took that day has been examined, debated, and dissected. Was she simply caught in the wrong place at the wrong time? Did she run toward danger to help, as many doctors did that morning, or was something else already unfolding long before the towers fell? For more than 2 decades, that single day, September 10, has stayed frozen in time, a snapshot of a woman moving through the world, unaware that her next 24 hours would blur forever into the chaos of history. When Ron Lieberman came home after midnight on September 10, 2001, the apartment felt wrong. The lights were off. Sneha was not there. At first, he did not panic. She was known for her independence, the kind of person who might stay out late with friends, who did not need to explain every movement. New York was full of lives that moved on separate tracks, but still circled each other faithfully. He went to bed, assuming she would return by morning. But when he woke up, the world outside had changed. At 8:46 a.m., the first plane struck the North Tower of the World Trade Center just blocks from their home. Windows shattered, alarms screamed, and clouds of smoke rolled through Battery Park. Ron ran outside, desperate to make sense of the chaos. By the time the second plane hit, the streets were a blur of running, dust, and disbelief. When the towers fell, the air turned into a wall of ash that swallowed the neighborhood. Hours later, as survivors stumbled through the smoke, Ron began searching. Hospitals, police lists, emergency shelters, anywhere she might have gone to help or to hide. He called everyone he could think of. Family, colleagues, friends. No one had seen her. Days turned into weeks. Posters with her face appeared on street corners alongside hundreds of others. People assumed she was one more name among the missing, a doctor who had rushed toward danger, doing what came naturally to her. But small details did not fit neatly into that narrative. Her shopping bags from the night before were never found. The apartment showed no signs of her return, no new clothes, no footprints in the layer of dust that later coated everything after the collapse. A security camera caught a woman entering their building at 8:43 a.m. on September 11, just minutes before the first impact. Some believed it was Sneha, though the footage was too grainy to confirm. Without a body, without evidence, every theory remained only half alive. Her husband clung to the belief that she had run into the towers to help. The police were less convinced. But in the middle of that national tragedy, her individual mystery faded behind the enormity of the collective one. Sneha's disappearance was unlike most others. It had no clear line between choice, accident, and catastrophe. One moment, she was living an ordinary life. The next, she was gone, not just missing, but absorbed into an event that left almost nothing behind to find. When the morning of September 11, 2001 arrived, New York woke into an ordinary day that would soon fracture history in half. Sneha's home in Battery Park City sat just a few blocks from the World Trade Center, close enough that the sound of the first explosion could shake the glass. The attacks began at 8:46 a.m. The North Tower was hit, then the South. What followed was chaos, sirens, falling debris, and the kind of fear no one could yet name. For hours, the city was filled with unanswered phones, blocked streets, and people running toward safety or toward danger, sometimes both at once. For those who knew Sneha, the timeline carried a terrible symmetry. She was a doctor. She lived nearby, and she was missing exactly when thousands were injured and calling for help. The idea that she might have run toward the towers, toward the smoke, the noise, the collapsing steel, was not just possible. It was who she was. Her family believed that instinct could have been her final act. Her husband, Ron, spent the following days searching through the ash-gray ruins of Lower Manhattan. Hospitals overflowed with the wounded, yet none had records of her admission. He pinned flyers to walls, handed photos to volunteers, and called every morgue in the city. But Sneha's name never appeared on any list, not among the injured, not among the confirmed dead. Still, for many, the simplest explanation was also the most human. She had seen or heard the first impact, rushed out to help, and was lost when the towers collapsed. It was a story that made emotional sense. A doctor's reflex overriding fear. Yet even as it offered comfort, the theory left holes. No eyewitness placed her at the scene. None of her belongings surfaced in the debris. No remains were identified as hers among the thousands recovered. Investigators could not confirm whether she had even returned home the night before. What remained was a haunting silence, a gap between evidence and intuition. Did Sneha die a hero's death, one of the first physicians to respond to the unimaginable, or was her fate shaped by something else entirely, hidden beneath the same dust that erased the city's skyline? In a tragedy that swallowed thousands, her story became a single thread woven into the larger chaos, fragile, unproven, but impossible to ignore. In the days after 9/11, Lower Manhattan was a blur of dust, confusion, and names. Thousands were missing, and Sneha's face appeared among them, one more photo on a wall of desperate hope. Her husband, Ron Lieberman, refused to give in to the idea that she had simply disappeared. He began searching relentlessly, convinced she had died trying to help. He contacted hospitals, shelters, and morgues, checking every list. When official efforts stalled under the weight of thousands of missing persons, Ron took matters into his own hands. He hired private investigators to trace her final movements, the store footage, the credit card use, the calls she made that afternoon. The investigators followed every lead. They noted that her last known location, the Century 21 department store, was directly across from the Twin Towers. The items she purchased were never found in her apartment. To them, this suggested one clear story. Sneha had walked out of that store, seen the towers burning, and done what any doctor might do, run toward the wounded. Her family supported that conclusion. They knew her character impulsive, but selfless, drawn to crisis instead of away from it. In their minds, there was no mystery. She had died a doctor's death, one defined by instinct and courage rather than chance. Ron pressed investigators, journalists, and city officials for recognition. He wanted her name listed among the victims of the attacks. He wanted her story to be seen for what he believed it was: not a disappearance, but an act of compassion in the face of disaster. Still, the official records were silent. The scale of the tragedy meant that personal stories were swallowed whole. To the police, Sneha was one of hundreds with uncertain fates. To Ron, she was the one person he could not stop looking for. The private investigator's theory that she perished in the collapse while aiding others became the version of events that her loved ones clung to. But for the authorities, it was not enough. Without evidence, her death was only a possibility, not a fact. And so, two stories began to form: the family's truth, grounded in love and faith, and the city's truth, bound by the cold language of proof. In the space between them lay the silence of a woman who could no longer speak for herself. As weeks turned into months, the emotional urgency of the search gave way to the procedural patience of police work. The NYPD Missing Persons Unit began re-examining Sneha's case, and what they uncovered did not fit the clean narrative of a doctor who died a hero's death. Their findings drew a far more complicated portrait, one that unsettled her husband and infuriated her family. Investigators discovered that in the months before her disappearance, Sneha had been under professional and personal strain. There had been reports of conflict at her residency program. Official records suggested she was facing disciplinary action, possibly connected to accusations of unprofessional behavior. Her family claimed those charges were exaggerated, a misunderstanding tied to her outspokenness, but the incident had weighed heavily on her career and reputation. Police also looked into her social habits. Some colleagues described nights of heavy drinking, long hours spent at downtown bars, and a pattern of disappearing for a day or two without notice. One report mentioned a pending misdemeanor charge after an altercation with another woman in a nightclub, a case that was later dropped but added fuel to the police theory that her life had become unstable. To detectives, these details opened new possibilities. Maybe Sneha had not been a victim of terrorism at all. Maybe she had left voluntarily, overwhelmed by the pressures of work and marriage. Or perhaps something more sinister had happened the night before the attacks, an encounter that turned violent, a wrong place at the wrong time. Ron and Sneha's family rejected this entirely. They argued the police were scapegoating her, turning a missing victim into a suspect in her own disappearance. To them, these stories distorted who she really was, a passionate young doctor whose independence was being misread as recklessness. But the lack of hard evidence left the case open to interpretation. The NYPD's internal memo on her disappearance quietly shifted tone, no longer treating her as a confirmed 9/11 casualty, but as a person missing under unusual circumstances. It was bureaucratic language that felt cruelly impersonal to those who loved her. The deeper investigators dug, the less clear everything became. The timeline blurred. Her last movements could be explained in a dozen ways. A shopping trip, became a question mark. A missing night became a blank page. And so, while the nation mourned its collective tragedy, the story of Sneha Anne Philip split in two, one version built on compassion and sacrifice, the other on doubt and human imperfection. Both contained fragments of truth, but neither could bring her home. For most families of those lost on September 11, tragedy came with an unbearable certainty. Names identified, remains found, lives mourned. For Ron Lieberman, there was no such closure. The city had filed his wife's name under missing, not deceased. There was no confirmation she had been in the towers, no recovered body, no official acknowledgement that she had died in the attacks. This absence of proof became the center of a legal battle that would stretch for years. In 2003, Ron petitioned the New York Surrogates Court to have Sneha legally declared a 9/11 victim, allowing her to be recognized among those who died in the attacks. It was not about compensation, he said. It was about truth and the dignity of a name carved in stone beside the others. The city resisted. Prosecutors argued that Sneha's death could not be tied to the terrorist attacks with reasonable certainty. The court examined every detail: her last purchase, the unclaimed shopping bags, the ambiguous surveillance footage, the silence of her phone records. They found no evidence she had entered the World Trade Center, no witness who had seen her near Ground Zero, no trace of her in the wreckage. In 2004, the court issued its ruling. The petition was denied. The judge stated there was no proof that Dr. Dobler Philip was at or near the World Trade Center during the attacks. On paper, she was simply missing, her case unresolved, a disappearance that happened to coincide with the worst mourning in modern American history. To Ron, the decision felt like losing her all over again. The city had reduced his wife to a question mark. He appealed the ruling, insisting that the only reasonable explanation was that she had perished during the chaos of 9/11. His lawyers argued that the evidence of circumstance, her proximity to the site, her medical training, her absence since that morning created a moral certainty, if not a forensic one. The appeal dragged on for years. It was not just about Sneha anymore. It was about how a society defines death amid catastrophe. When the world itself becomes the crime scene, what does it mean to prove someone was there? Each filing, each hearing, reopened the wound for her family, a reminder that grief had to be justified, documented, and approved before it could be recognized. And still, Ron persisted. To give up would mean accepting that his wife's story had been erased by paperwork, not by fire and falling steel. After years of frustration and legal back and forth, something finally shifted. On January 31, 2008, nearly 7 years after the attacks, a New York State appellate court overturned the earlier decision. The judges ruled that Dr. Sneha Anne Philip should indeed be recognized as a victim of the September 11 attacks. Their reasoning was simple but humane. Given the facts of her life, her proximity to the towers, her profession as a doctor, and the complete absence of evidence that she was alive after that morning, the most reasonable conclusion was that she had died in the disaster. The court noted that there was nothing in the record to suggest she had any reason to disappear voluntarily. It was a legal decision, yes, but it also felt like a moral one. For Ron and for her family, the ruling was not triumph, but release. They had spent years caught between belief and bureaucracy, fighting not only grief, but the burden of proving it. Now, the state itself had affirmed what they had always known: Sneha was gone, lost among the chaos of that morning, one life among thousands extinguished without warning. Her name was added to the official 9/11 memorial roll, carved into bronze at the National September 11 Memorial and Museum in Lower Manhattan. It stands there now among the others, between doctors, firefighters, office workers, and strangers who never met but share the same day of loss. The ruling also became a quiet precedent. It acknowledged that not every tragedy leaves evidence behind, that some disappearances, especially in mass events like 9/11, exist beyond the reach of investigation. It offered families of the missing a small kind of grace, the right to mourn without proof. For Ron, it meant that his wife's story had finally been restored to history, not as a police file or a mystery, but as a human life that ended in service and in chaos. Yet even in victory, the questions lingered. The court had granted her name a place among the dead, but it could not tell him where she had been, what she had seen, or how her final moments unfolded. Recognition had come at last, but closure never truly did. Even with the court's ruling, the silence around Sneha's final moments has never lifted. The mystery remains unresolved, built from fragments that never quite fit together. There are no remains, no personal belongings, no witness who can say with certainty where she was when the towers fell. Her last verified sighting the century, 21 surveillance footage showed her calm and composed, shopping beneath the shadow of the Twin Towers. After that, she simply vanishes from the record. Investigators scoured hospital rosters, security logs, and recovery lists from ground zero. Nothing connected to her name was ever found. Even the video of the woman entering Sneha's apartment building at 8:43 a.m. on September 11 remains unresolved. The footage is grainy and dark, the figure faceless, and the woman is empty-handed, no shopping bags, no clear identifiers. Some say it was Sneha returning home before the chaos began. Others argue it was someone else entirely, another resident caught on camera minutes before disaster. Inside the apartment, investigators found dust, the fine gray powder that coated Lower Manhattan after the towers fell. Her cat's paw prints were visible in it, but there were no human footprints, suggesting she had not come home after the shopping trip. The bags she would purchased were never located, neither in the apartment nor among recovered debris. For her family, these missing objects became symbols of something larger, not just a woman lost, but a story trapped between two possibilities. If she died in the towers, she was a victim of unimaginable circumstance. If she did not, then someone, somewhere, knows what happened before the world changed that morning. Every theory leaves an ache of uncertainty. Did she run toward the noise and smoke, guided by instinct? Was she caught in the first wave of chaos on the street below? Or had something already gone wrong the night before, hidden beneath the routine of errands and evening plans? Time has not offered clarity, only distance. What remains are questions, looping endlessly through every retelling. Where did Sneha go? And why did the city that remembered so many lose track of her completely? Even now, more than 20 years later, her case stands as both tragedy and echo-proof that in moments of collective loss, some disappear not just from sight, but from certainty itself. Today, more than 2 decades later, Sneha Anne Philip's story stands suspended between history and myth. A tragedy caught at the intersection of one woman's disappearance and a nation's defining disaster. Officially, her case is closed. Legally, she is listed among those who perished in the attacks on September 11, 2001. Her name gleams on the bronze panels of the 9/11 Memorial in Lower Manhattan, where visitors trace the letters with quiet reverence, often unaware that behind them lies one of the most debated disappearances of the modern era. But beneath that recognition, the case remains unresolved in spirit. No new leads have surfaced since the 2008 court ruling. The police file has gathered dust. The evidence has not changed. Investigators, journalists, and amateur sleuths have revisited her timeline countless times, yet no new clue has emerged, no overlooked footage, no personal item recovered from the rubble, no witness stepping forward after all these years. Still, the conversation never fully fades. True crime forums continue to debate her last steps. Journalists revisit the contradictions, and 9/11 memorial events often spark quiet discussions about the few who vanished without proof of where or how they died. Her story has become more than an unsolved case. It is a study in how personal disappearance becomes absorbed into collective tragedy. To many, Sneha represents the blurred boundaries between heroism and uncertainty. She may have run toward the towers that morning, guided by her duty as a doctor. Or she may have met her fate through unrelated misfortune, her death merely coinciding with the world's worst timing. The truth, locked somewhere in that vanished timeline, remains unreachable. Her husband, Ron, has since retreated from public attention. Those close to him say he found a kind of fragile peace in her recognition, not closure, exactly, but acceptance that the woman he loved became part of something vast and unknowable. The fight to have her name honored gave her story shape, even if it could not restore its ending. And so, Sneha's life has become both symbol and mystery, a reminder that not every question from that day can be answered, not every loss can be categorized. Hers is the story of how one individual, full of promise and imperfection, disappeared into history's largest shadow, leaving behind not just absence, but an unresolved silence that still speaks. And so, as the dust of time settles, the story of Dr. Pear, Sneha Anne Philip, remains suspended, half tragedy, half mystery. She was more than a name on a memorial wall. She was a healer, a dreamer, a young woman who came to New York to save lives and, in some unknowable way, may have given her own. Her disappearance reminds us that history is not made only of grand moments, but of quiet human details: a phone call with a mother, a receipt from a store, a walk through the city before the world turned to ash. Whether she died rushing toward chaos or vanished in a way we will never understand, Sneha's story stands as a mirror of that fragile morning, full of courage, confusion, and unfinished sentences. Some mysteries end with answers. Others, like this one, live on because they refuse to be simplified. What matters now is that she is remembered not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a person who lived fully in the brief time she was given. Thank you for staying with me through this story tonight. If you found meaning in her journey, take a moment to think about the people whose lives touched history in ways that will never be fully known. Until next time, take care and good night.